Board Member Dominguez, we are streaming.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Dr. Albright, may I have a roll call, please?
Janelle Astorga,
Here.
Ronaldo Tomorito, Courtney Jackson,
Here.
Josefina Dominguez.
Here. Our first item for consideration and action is to consider adoption of the September 9th, 2024 Policy Committee meeting agenda. May I ask for a motion and a second, please?
I move to approve the policy committee agenda for September 9th.
I will second.
Dr. Albright, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Janelle Astorga,
Yes.
Ronaldo Tomorito, Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes. Let's see. So to provide some background for the viewing public and for people present here, in November of 2023, the Albuquerque Public Schools Board of Education adopted its governance manual, which incorporates the board's goals and guardrails and its delegation and governance policies. Since its adoption, the manual has been updated 3 times. Once to include language regarding the superintendent's evaluation, another time to designate the board president as a contact for legal counsel, and a third time to correct an omission stating that the board's vice president can sign for the president in case of absence. The committee has now been asked to consider further amendments to the governance manual, specifically regarding the role of committees and committee chairpersons. This is the first read for the proposed changes to the policy. If the committee agrees upon the amendments, the governance manual will be posted for 30 days on the APS Board of Education's website for public comment. It will then go before the committee for a second read and possible action. And I believe that's scheduled for November. I'd also like to add that I think there are 2 objectives for the policy meeting tonight. One, there's an immediate, and then there's a long-term. The immediate is to clarify the role and responsibilities of committees and committee chairs. And under that objective, we also have an opportunity to learn how we go about creating policy language while abiding by the many laws and rules involved in this process. We navigate New Mexico laws and statutes, APS staff policies and procedures, and our own governance needs. And we are a volunteer board. We are not a paid or professional board. Several of our board members work full-time, and so we must strive to create a system that accommodates full-time workers who have a desire to serve as volunteers in support of our public schools. And so this last point segues into a larger objective. And that is to create a governance manual that and a new board member handbook, we hope, that will allow for a more equitable representation of our Albuquerque community that promotes transparency, ongoing orientation, or onboarding for new board members and leadership capacity building. And so to build that handbook, I would like to ask a committee member to keep a running list of those items that may pop up tonight as distinguishable from policy that are more about process or procedures. I will keep a running list is here next to me, but I always think it's best if there are more than, if there's more than one person keeping track. So on that note, let's get started with the discussion and with the understanding that this is a teaching and a learning moment for board members and the viewing public. Let's try to refrain from the esoteric language of educationese and abbreviations. And mostly let's show grace for one another as we go through this process. And so with that, we'll begin with sections 4I. And that's been, the proposed change is for it to read board committees and committee chairs, roles and responsibilities. Are there any comments or discussion about questions about the changes that have been proposed?
I can start, Dominguez. One of the things that I did see was on 1E, just the way it reads was a little wonky for me. So I would propose editing that to say committees are open for membership throughout the year, but serving members and committee chairs are elected at the first meeting of the year, which also might provide a little bit of redundancy to 1G because it talks about board elections. But that was just one suggestion I had in this portion.
Could you repeat that, please?
So my suggestion was committees are open for membership throughout the year, but serving members and committee chairs are elected at the first meeting of the year. And then again, 1G talks about, I think it is 1G. There's another point that talks about electing committee chairs. So there might be some redundancy there.
So could you clarify, but serving members? So you make the distinction.
Yeah, I think it's good to make the distinction of who's able to vote on the committee. Even though we're all able to show up to the committee hearing or meetings and we're able to put in questions, there should be a distinction between who is able to actually have a voice on those committees, just so there isn't confusion.
Member Astorga, if I can add to that, I guess I had some questions about this too, especially the at the first board meeting of the year, the addition. I get my first question was, what problem is this trying to solve? The way it's written, if it's at the first board meeting of the year and thereafter throughout the year, then doesn't that mean always? And if we want to make it clearer, I would suggest something similar to what Board Member Astorga suggested, which would be committee membership is open to all members and are first appointed during, but not limited to, the first business meeting of the year. So I guess my first question though to you, Chair Dominguez, is what problem were you trying to solve by adding this to the policy manual?
Well, it was a suggestion that came to me, and I accepted the suggestion just to open discussion. I think it goes to the point of voting, right? And so do we want, I thought it was clear that committees were open for membership to all members, but to be a voting member, you had to self-select at the start of when elections were held for committee chairs. So, it's a good discussion point. Do we want to be gatekeepers?
Well, I think the other issue is that the way that this is written is that, again, if you're trying to solve the problem of people understanding that they have the option to join a committee, that's one thing. But the 4HJ, it conflicts with 4HJ in the manual, in which it's the board president who actually has the responsibility to assign committee members. So I guess we can't really understand how to write this until we understand what the problem is we're trying to solve. So was the problem that members didn't feel like they had the ability to join a committee? Or was the problem that there was confusion about who can vote on a committee?
That's how I interpreted the question and the suggestion.
Okay, is
That it
by
was
chance
about,
is the member who of the committee, is there a committee member who made that suggestion that can maybe elucidate a little bit? It wasn't me.
so let's talk about that. Why is it so important that, I mean, we started with a committee of the whole. And we moved away from that. So is it important that if I think the issue here, from my perspective, is one of voting, having voting rights on the committee. And that in order to have those voting rights, you have to weigh in at the first meeting of the year to commit to the committee. Does that make sense to others? Board Member Astorga?
Yeah, I was just reading the question beforehand where you agreed to the suggestion. And I don't know if you are reading that to Board Member Jackson, but I could just read it for everybody so we know what we're talking about. It says, this edit would limit when committee members can and cannot join a committee. What if someone's interests or obligations change? I suggest changing it to committees are open for the membership to all board members and are first appointed during, but not limited to, the first business meeting of the year. So I think for me, that kind of provides a little bit of background to the confusion, because we do elect those people at the beginning of the year. So if we leave it open, there really is no way for us to change who is on those committees except for the next year. So I think that might be some misunderstanding there, or who can and cannot be sitting on the committee. We can all attend them, but the clarifying rule of who has the vote, like you're saying.
Mm-hmm. And I think one really crucial thing to point out about that is committee members are not actually elected. We don't have anything that says that they are elected. All committee members are appointed, and they're appointed through the role of the board president. So we need to be sure that we're careful about not saying committee elections, because we don't go through a committee election process in January. We go through a self, what's the word? We self-nominate, and then I believe looking at 4H3J, the board president appoints board members to serve on board committees unless specified otherwise in board policies. So it's important to point out it's not elections, it's self-selection and then appointment. Now, that being said, who's to say that we all don't say that we want to sit on the finance committee and we all get appointed to the finance committee? But the point of committees are open for membership to all board members. Historically, when we first went through this process with the governing manual, was because there was concern that some people would be left out of the process, but everybody is allowed to attend and everybody is allowed to submit questions. It's just a matter of who is actually sitting on that committee.
Well, and who has, the way I took that question was who has the right to vote?
That it's only the members of the committee.
Correct. And so what I see this question asking is, how can we amplify that?
Well, I mean, that's,
And that, to my understanding, is then we need to make it clear that if you want to, that this is an important committee, if you want to vote, you need to sign on at that very first meeting. You need to be clear that you need to make your wishes known that you want to be on that committee, to be a voting member in that first meeting of the year. Is that correct?
so in that, and sorry, Board Member Astorga, Board Member Tomorito, feel free to jump in. But if that's the case, then the language that should be there as a suggestion would be committee membership is open to all members and are first appointed during, but not limited to, the first business meeting of the year.
Could you say that one more time? Committee membership is open to all members.
And are first appointed during, but not limited to, the first business meeting of the year.
So I just
And
want but not limited to, because then wouldn't that suggest that at any moment we can add somebody onto a committee?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if we use the most recent year as an example, let's see, it might even be the policy committee. The policy committee at first was Chair Dominguez, Board Member Astorga, and Board Member Tomorito. But a month later, I was appointed to the policy committee. So I wasn't appointed in December, but I was appointed throughout the year.
Thank you for clarifying.
Sure. And that also helps to also clarify, if let's say for some reason I can't fulfill my responsibility, it allows me to pull off as well. There was also something that was said that I think we need to be really careful about. This section is about all board committees. This is not a discussion simply on policy committee. All of these amendments will also pertain to finance and to audit. So I think we need to be really careful about focusing our lens solely on how this language pertains to the policy committee.
So what I would like clarified, however, is voting rights. Being clear that I don't, the reason I answered agreed and suggestion accepted, what I took from this question was a desire to I think it's about voting. And so I think that's what I would like clarified here. So if you don't make your wishes known at that first meeting, are you not allowed a vote?
I think that goes back to 1C, right? Or is it 1D actually? The board will consider voting on items approved by the committee that same month. So they still have a say on what gets approved or not. It might not be during the committee discussions, but they still have a say at those board meetings afterwards where we as an entire board approve those agendas or those policies, whatever it might be.
No, I mean, yes, Board Member Astorga is correct. And also how people vote is outlined in Robert's rules. It's outlined in parliamentary procedure. This section is not about voting. This section is about admission to a committee or appointment to a committee.
And does it address the question? Do you think we're addressing the concern in the question? I mean, I don't know who,
I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know what the problem was. I guess I didn't even understand why there was an amendment added to it. I thought it made sense that it was committees are open for membership to all board members, period. So I didn't understand why it had to be so specific.
Yeah, and without that person's voice, I don't know. All I can do is assume that, you know, maybe there was, again, new board members may have a misunderstanding about whether or not they were allowed on these committees after the initial meeting, initial self-appointments. So
maybe that's just something that in January, when we go through this process again, if board services is listening, that's just something that gets added to the discussion report at the beginning. Just a clarification that committee membership is open to all members. By any parliamentary procedure through Robert's rules, committee members have voting rights. But, you know, to board member Astorga's point, it's merely to recommend policies to the board. It's ultimately the entire board that is making the decision on any of this. It's just recommending powers. It's not necessarily voting to approve certain policies. So a suggestion that I might have is leave it at committees are open for membership to all board members, period. And then when you go and look at what is currently G, I need to get to my notes. Oh, what is currently G, I would suggest using the language that we have in the or similar to what we have in the archived board committee procedure document. That says, what does it say right now? During its first board meeting of the year, I would suggest saying at the first business meeting of the year, the board will elect standing committee chairs.
in E?
In G.
G. So you leave it there.
Right, because each one is addressing different issues. E is addressing membership. G is
Yes.
addressing election. So instead of saying during its first meeting of the year, the board will elect chairs by majority vote to the Audit, Finance, and Policy Committee or any standing committee the board creates, simply say at the first business meeting of the year, the board will elect standing committee chairs. Period. And then what that addresses by simply saying standing committee chairs is it allows for the document to be fluid because we still have not gone through a committee diet.
Well, we have gone through it. We've started it, but we're not
We've started,
finished.
we have not gone through a committee diet. We did a general, an initial clearing out, but we as a board have not had that discussion on which committees we're going to keep and which committees, obviously we're going to keep finance and audit, but we as a board have not had that discussion. So to eliminate the need to come back and address this, I would simply say in G, at the first business meeting of the year, the board will elect standing committee chairs.
So we've jumped to G. Are we, I just want to make sure that we are finished with E.
I was just gonna go back to the point about voting, if we wanted to add, and this is just to throw it out there in discussion. Committees are open for membership to all board members, and serving members are appointed, or something about that so that it's clarified that those members are appointed. I think that's important.
And which committees are, or say that again?
The serving members on the committees, right? So anybody can have interest in it, as it says, committees are open for membership to all board members. But we just had a discussion about how the committee members are appointed.
So
So can we
I'm
add
gl-
that?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the verb appointed implies that you're not self-selected. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Well, that's what it is, right? We could share interest in it, but we're ultimately appointed to committees that we share interest in. So to go back to the confusion of the question of elections, and we're not being elected to sit on a board, we're actually appointed. I think that's important to put in there. And you can phrase it in any other way that you might find more comfortable, but just to make that point.
So in reading the New Mexico School Board Association's school board manual, I saw this terminology, appointment, but as I continued reading, I noticed that it threw me for a loop, because an appointment is made by, in our case, by the president. But it was clarified later in the manual that appointments can also be voted on by the board. So I don't want the impression that, I don't think it's wise to put that kind of power in one person to appoint members of a committee. I don't think that's a good word to use. So, this year, if we weren't appointed, we self-selected. We voiced an interest, and it was more fluid than an appointment implies. And so I want to steer clear of that word.
But the language of the document says appoint board members to serve on board committees.
Which document are you referring
The
to?
governance manual. Our governance manual says that.
To ad hoc committees.
No, ma'am.
Well, then, how do we feel about that? And again, appointments.
I don't think that any of the board chairs that we have had since I have been on this board have abused any sort of authority to make appointments. And I have a real problem, I'll tell you, with the language about having to be elected to serve on national, state, and local boards. That is severely inhibiting the participation of board members to participate in regards to our community outreach and engagement responsibilities.
So, okay, so we'll address that when we get to that point. But
So
for
to this
now,
point, our board as a whole, as a document for years, has given authority to the board chair to do that. And if we're going to substantially change how the board delegates that authority, then that needs to be a discussion of the entire board, not just this policy committee.
that's what this policy committee is revisiting the governance manual for language such
No,
as
no,
that.
right now, we are only revisiting the documents that were sent to us for
For these
I,
sections, correct?
for I, for J, for K. We are not revisiting for H. That is something that needs to be addressed. If we're going to revisit
And
the
that
governance
will-
manual, then we talk about that in November.
Correct, correct. But at the moment, and yes, these are tied. These two sections are tied. There will be implications for the rest of the manual. But right now, I'd like to finish up with this section E. Committee membership is open to all board members, because that, to me, that feels more democratic. And as it should be. If you want to serve on a committee, you should be able to do so without being appointed, correct? I'm hearing
Correct,
that
and that is
was-
exactly how we do business now. My suggestion was to end it at committees are open for membership to all board members, period. And then at the January meeting, when the board chair or board president is, as we go through that discussion, she could just give a reminder that all members are open to the committees. You have the ability to self-select. Sorry, my dog is barking.
Okay,
Dog is barking.
This is
So-
Ronalda.
oh, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, board member Tom Marito.
I think as a new board member, in the whole process of the election, that a thorough, and whether it's through this manual or whether it's through the governance manual, is at least for me as a new board member, it was trying to understand the process, but in the midst of it, sometimes you're when you first come in, you're trying to learn everything, but it's also this area of now you're running for a position. Now you got to do all these other roles and do everything. And even now it's one of trying to decide, when do we get the insight into these elections and fully understand what these do mean as a new board member. I don't know if I'm bringing up something new, but I'm just trying to also, as a new board member, when you come in, the vote's taken, and then you're trying to figure out positions and doing what you need to. But, and sometimes, just as we did now with 2 new board members in the executive committee, it's learn as you go. So I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there as more of an understanding to how new board members will gather that information and able to make the decision they need to as the election process proceeds.
Thank you
That's
for
all.
your perspective. Appreciate that. So, board member Tom Marito, if we leave this as committees are open for membership to all board members, is that how, what is not clear about that?
I think just to all board members with clarification that the understanding of the new board members, this process is, what is it called? The process is just made more aware to the incoming board members, and the roles that these positions take on.
The roles and the importance of them?
Yes, and then, because it's a part of, you're also really looking at time, and you're looking at your own schedule and how these all work out. But I'm just saying that because of as a new board member, the moment that happened, we were really trying to understand the process, and it just felt like, okay, you're going to get to know this, you're going to get to know that. But at the same time, it was one of, I wish there was like a little bit of time from the time you get sworn in to a time to know, okay, this is what you're going to do in this meeting. prepare for it and look at everything. But it was really hard to understand just the process of when you get sworn in and then you have the board meeting. And it's all this energy that's at peak, and it leaves us in a position to really, okay, we're going to do this now, and we're going to move into this. Yeah, and I just feel that more needs to go into training of new board members. And I don't know.
I made board member Tomorito, because I understand where you're coming from as a new board member and how it's a lot in the first business meeting, right? So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's any clarification, if that's something that is statute, that we have to have elections on that first meeting of the year, or if
Yeah.
maybe we can do it like the second meeting of the year or something like that to give new board members more time to adapt into their role. I don't know if anybody has that information.
Council in the room.
So I think while Art is looking, is he's gonna bless us with his knowledge here in a sec. I think that is also a suggestion of Council of Great City Schools, is to have the elections maybe at the second business meeting and not necessarily at the first business meeting. But what I'm also hearing is that the board orientation process needs to be clarified and maybe made more thorough. And so the good news about that is we have a year to work on that board orientation process. And by that point, all of us will be much more invested in understanding in SOFG and the rules of the board and what we do. So I think that that's something that we can work on. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a policy committee that works on the board orientation. That's something that we can leave to an entire board discussion. But maybe again, board services, if we could take notes on improving the board orientation process.
Board Member Jackson, we can put that down for the orientation, as well as probably when we have the orientation with potential candidates. It sounds like there is some work that we could do as far as the information meetings that are set up about people and their interest in running for office. Mr. Melendres, the question was, is it required that the election for officers and committee chairs take place at the first meeting of the year when new members are sworn in? Is that required by law? You're on mute.
The short answer is no. And the reason is that there are officers serving in their position at the first meeting of the board. New members of the board are sworn in, and at that point, you could have your vote as you have done, or at the next meeting, you, as a group, the board can vote for the chair of the board. It is not required to happen all at once. It is a great suggestion to have an orientation pre-first meeting.
Thank you for that clarification, and thank you, Board Member Tom Morito, because that clarifies that your comments clarify the need to add. I think we had a good orientation or onboarding system this year, but we were lacking this piece. And so,
Well, no, just to be only because when we use the word all, all, and but then it's also one of these things where as it's written, It's also stating that all of us are on board of this decision-making process and we're completely aware of what needs to happen. But it's counter to that for new board members. But thank you for checking that out. I appreciate that.
So Board Member Tom Morito, before you mute yourself, could you, we had a question earlier about were you concerned about the membership aspect or the ability to join the conversation during the committee meetings?
I just think many times, and this is only coming from a new board member, is sometimes, and sitting there, you're trying to figure out just the processes you're proceeding and moving along. And so, and possibly, yes, going in, there was the audit, the finance, and then the policy committees, but to fully, and then there's the appointments of the president, vice president, and the secretary. But really understanding even the amount of time that goes into that. And if you choose to do that, that's where you're trying to decide, what does that require without asking the question of somebody who did run for vice president and president about the time allotted, especially for those who are new, because I can tell you sitting on national boards, this is a lot different. This is a lot different than, because it's more in, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's information that needs to be obtained. So it's just one of these things of being a little bit more aware. And I'm sure if we did the onboarding training a little more, with asking new board members their background as they come in, so they fully understand that what kind of roles they're undertaking. And I remember to the question that Courtney said about the governing versus your legislative duties. So sometimes those things are clouded. And so with our back knowledge, you're trying to understand, okay, can I use what I have to understand this process? But I think if we looked at the terms of more education-wise and how this works, that would be very helpful.
Thank you. I'm writing all this down for handbook and also for future onboarding. Okay, so I'm hearing we agree that we can go back to the original language. Committees are open for membership to all board members. Can we move on?
Period. Yes.
Okay. Any questions about F?
Can I actually suggest we just go back to the top of the document and go through it?
Okay, sure.
Because like jumping is a little bit of a challenge.
So, okay, we're at the top of the document, board committees and committee chairs, roles and responsibilities. Board committees have one essential role to strengthen and support the board's work. The role of board committees is only to advise the board, not the district staff. And the first edit says, the superintendent's role is to support the work of the chair of the committee. I'll let others speak first before I weigh in.
Okay, well, I again don't understand why this is in here. The role of the superintendent is actually not to support the work of the chair or of the committee. If you look at 3B in the governance manual, it specifically states what the role of the superintendent is. We also have in 4Q, the specific superintendent issues. Board members must remain mindful that district personnel are the responsibility of the superintendent, not the board. The superintendent must listen to such concerns, review the matter, and notify the board of the resolution to the extent the policy allows. So I think we already have language in there that determines what the supportive role of the superintendent is. And so I don't understand why this is being inserted into this document.
Does anyone else want to weigh in?
I think going back to the point of board member Tomorito, and just reading this as a first-time board member, it's nice just to clarify in one spot, right? This is the roles and responsibilities. So a lot of times we wonder like, well, what role does the superintendent have in this? What role does the district staff have in it? So I think it's just like a clean sentence to add as clarifying. But I do also understand board member Jackson's point that it's already somewhere else. But I think the intent was roles and responsibilities, and let's kind of just lay everything out. Because if it's your first time reading it, you're not going to know to go back and forth to see where those other points are. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you for that perspective.
And you know, I would have to agree, because you got to remember too, we're not the only, well, many times as you go through this, that trying to make it to where it flows properly, and also recognizing that, yes, as a board member that has been on their particular seat for a while, they would understand where those pieces are. But just as a new board member, you're reading it here, or there's a lot going on when you come on. So if it's easy to read something that states, oh, okay, we see this, we understand it, and easier to find, it's very helpful.
I also want to go back to something that you said, board member Jackson, that the role of the superintendent is not to support the work of the chair or the committee. What would be a better sentence than if you feel like that is not the role of the superintendent in this area?
Well, I guess let me clarify. I think the role of the superintendent as a whole is listed in policy 3B. There's a whole policy that determines exactly what the role is. So I guess I don't understand why there's a redundancy, why that's there if we have an entire policy prior to arriving at this one that perfectly outlines what the superintendent's role is. So, you know, for example, in recommending policy for board adoption, the superintendent will identify when the board is required to adopt policy. You know,
Do you cite that section?
3B, all of 3B is the superintendent's role.
Okay, but you're citing.
Yeah.
I was
also-
citing
just
3B3.
Instead of the sentence that says superintendent's role is to blah, 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 can we just cite that the superintendent's role is outlined in 3B?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that'll-
just insert it. That would insert it, or put a footnote at the bottom clarifying it.
This is
My concern about that, though, and I'm sorry to be like the thorn in the tire. If we do that, then we have to be consistent throughout the entire governance manual, where we're going to have to go back and cite, if we take that last issue with committee appointments, then we're going to have to go back and cite that that's actually in 4HJ or 4H3J. So I kind of what I'm hearing, the concern of why we're having this discussion in the first place is that orientation to committee roles and to the governance manual in particular needs to have a greater depth and breadth, because it's kind of sounding like the pieces aren't being connected throughout the governance manual.
Yeah, that's how it feels. And I also want to just appreciate the more of like the contract language type expertise that you have in the room and what we might have to change if we change some of these things. So I thank you for that. But yeah, I think that is part of it, right? That's part of the conversation, is that we still don't fully have a true understanding. And I think that's one of the major reasons why I did want a retreat, was because that could be a space where we do go over this. And if we have different interpretations of the governance manual, we can talk about it there. So yeah, I think that's kind of part of these discussions. So thanks for pointing that out.
Well, and it definitely seems like it. And let me just state as well, I've probably spent just on this document 6 hours going back and forth, trying to see where there were redundancies, trying to see where there were conflicts. So I'm not tooting my own horn, but I had to put in a lot of work to make sure that this document was consistent. And so I am happy to sit down with anybody to go through this and to say, you know, what's your question? Oh, it's in this section. You know, why do I think there's a redundancy? Oh, because I found it over here. Why do I think there's a conflict? Because I found it over here. But I had to put in work to understand where everything lined up. So I'm happy to, trust me, I love this stuff. So I'm happy to sit down with anybody.
Thank you, Board Member Jackson. I think what gave rise to this particular sentence was when we were trying to get this meeting together, and there was confusion about who do I go to? I thought I had to go to the board office staff. But when we met with Superintendent Duran Blakey, it was she who clarified that she wants to be more the point guard here, and that we should be conversing with her about a desire to move forward with a policy committee meeting. And if you look at 3B3, there's nothing that makes it clear that within the roles and responsibilities of being on a committee or being a committee chair, that you should meet with the superintendent. And so I think that's what this language is trying to address, is to make it clear that you go to the superintendent to request that meeting.
So if that's the case, if this is trying to address process, and that can be put into a how-to manual that I believe that board member or board chair Dominguez, I believe you're working on, right? Like,
yes.
If the question is when do I go meet with the superintendent, that doesn't necessarily have to be in the policy. That can be separated out into how do I chair a meeting how-to guide? Right? I mean, it seems like we're trying to insert into policy things that should be process or procedure.
This is Ronalda. Thank you, Courtney, for stating that. And that's what needs to be done in the onboard training. So that clarification right there helps us to understand these different departments of policy process and how these all work. That is vital to not only addressing some of these needs, but it helps us as new and incoming board members understand the parts of. And just like you said the other night, the governance versus the legislature, the educational policies versus the governance. You know, I think just a basic 101 on the simple parts and how they work would also help us to define the work and whether we are going about it the right way. And that's where I think with even the training and all of that, that will alleviate some of these conversations. And that's also, as Janelle stated, with the retreat, how do we help answer these questions, but at the same time, make a better onboard training for the next and incoming new board members? That then it helps us to understand that there is that voice. There was no way we could have those conversations, especially as a new board member. You're just sitting there following the process, but you're also wondering, oh, do I have a question? Where's this coming from? And how does this work? So I think once we start doing that, it's going to alleviate these roles and these questions to where probably even improve the jobs we're doing. So anyway, I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Well, and Board Member Tomorito, I think you make a great point. I mean, again, I'm just generalizing, but it seems like a lot of these changes that we are attempting to address tonight more go to the onboarding process, the orientation process, and something that we're actually trying to get from a training or a retreat, not necessarily something that we're trying to insert into a policy, into our governance manual. So it makes me wonder if it would make more sense to table this discussion until we've had the board retreat and the board training, so that maybe those key questions that you have can be addressed there. The policy manual, or the governance manual, can remain as is until we address it in November. Just a suggestion.
I currently know that right now with Board Member Dominguez, there are some issues that she is seeing, and I know right now with not having a policy meeting has also put into question, you know, some of the processes that are in place. But I think that you also have to remember that Board Member Dominguez is not new like we are. And so there's certain areas of concern that she really wants to bring up. And I think that those concerns are vital. As a new and incoming board, I do wish that we did have better training so we could sit at this table honestly and do the work that needs to happen. And I think the more we wait, the more it's one of just, is also to take the word that we're going to do that. Because I don't want to delay just because we're trying to do what we need to do. But I'm also trying just to remember that Board Member Dominguez has been here before. And I don't want to delay it to where, because I don't know what I'm doing. But I would hope that with those who are on this committee would just let us who are new people know, okay, this is how it works, this is what. Because it's great. The conversations we're having now with all the background knowledge has been very helpful. So I just want to insert that.
I'd like to continue, because I think this is good conversation, and I do want to go back to 3B, superintendent's role, number 3. And I'm going to read it out loud. In recommending policy for board adoption, the superintendent will identify when the board is required to adopt policy or has statutory decision-making authority that cannot be delegated to the superintendent. And this, the use of policy here, I mean, does the superintendent have say on our governance manual?
Are you asking?
Well, I mean, so I'm asking if, according to 3B3 in recommending policy, and this, actually, I'm bringing this up because board member Astorga made the comment, I think it was at Wednesday's meeting, that we use this term policy, and it's not, it's this overarching word. We use it as an umbrella term, but really we're talking about, we have several kinds of policies. We have a governance policy. We have educational policy that is administrative. We have educational policy that is part of board policy, our goals and the guardrails. And so I'm just going to drop that in everybody's ear, that requires clarification. And because we're talking currently about board governance and board committees, I don't think it hurts to clarify what the superintendent's role is with regard to the governance manual, and committees and committee chairs.
And does anybody have some? I don't want to keep jumping in. Okay, but nobody else is. So I think a couple things that we really need to be careful about is you said that there are a bunch of policies, but the board policies are the policies that are in the governance manual. There's 4 of them. There's goals, there's guardrails, there's delegation, and there's governing. Those are the board policies. And that process is done via student outcomes focused governance, community engagement and outreach. And that's done with the entirety of the board making those policies, which are those 4 policies. Any district policies that would be administrative or operational, those are brought forth by the superintendent. And that is done through the process that they have listed as an administrative policy in PB1. There's an entire document that talks about how and when Superintendent Blakey brings forth policies to the board that are outside of our purview that are listed in the governance manual.
That's
So,
not what's
I
on the
think it's a
table, though.
Well,
That's not
but
what I'm
I
bringing
needed
in.
to clarify because you said that we have educational policies, we have administrative policies. The only policies that we have are the set of 4 policies that are in our governance manual. That's the purview of the board. We don't have operational policies. We don't have administrative policies.
Okay, so the question goes back to why we went to the superintendent to get this committee meeting set.
Because
And to my review, there was nothing that I could find that made it clear that that the committee chair or the committee, had to go to, had to have a conversation with the superintendent. And I think if that is the case, then I think it needs to be here in the governance, manual under committees.
It is.
I mean,
It's
the
under
very
4K. It's in 4K under board agendas. The committee chair and superintendent or designee will set committee meeting agendas. 4K2. You,
Yes, correct.
first of
And-
all,
and we- I think it's too hard
need
to
to
have to,
just,
go ahead.
you go to the superintendent, and Dr. Blakey, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if I'm having an incorrect conversation, please jump in. You go to the superintendent to set the committee agenda. But again, you have to be really cognizant. This does not just have to do with policy. This has to do with finance and audit. This has to do with all of the agendas. So of course you're meeting with the superintendent because all of this work has to flow from the superintendent. If we're looking at finance, the finance chair, Crystal, couldn't possibly know all of the intricacies. So you have to meet with the superintendent in order to set an agenda.
Madam Chair, Board Member Jackson, that I think that is how we were interpreting it, is the agenda items being created with the chair and the superintendent as like audit and finance are good examples. This particular meeting, I think, was just confusion based on the conversation about the November board meeting to review the governance manual and then looking at it in September. I think within our own staff, it just got some cross wires on if we were talking about the November meeting or calling a meeting prior to November for this particular meeting. But normally the superintendent and the chair or the superintendent's designee set the agenda for committee meetings.
And I guess that was yes, that was a confusion. We just went I was going directly to board staff, assuming they were designees. But you know what this speaks to is if I'm committee chair and I'm going to go to this section to get guidance. And if there needs to be some redundancy, a limited amount, it's not so bad to put in, and I would rewrite that sentence to read that board chairs will meet with the superintendent to support the work of the committee and the chair. And I don't think it's one line. I don't think it hurts. And I want to go back to a point that I made earlier. We are a volunteer board and with limited time. And it's great that, you know, most people don't have 6 hours to go or an hour to go searching for this. I think it's our responsibility to create a governance manual that is accessible to full-time working volunteers.
Okay, we asked to be elected to this position. We put ourselves up, we asked to be elected. That means that we are required then to do the work. If
I don't think
if
people
we
aren't-
didn't want to do the work, then we shouldn't have put ourselves up for election. Believe me, I have a ton of other things that I can be doing. But I am dedicated to my elected position as a board member. So I take the time, I find the time to make sure that I understand my governance manual and that I understand my role. When I don't understand my role, I reach out to other people who maybe understand it better. That being said, you have committee chairs will discuss agendas with the superintendent. That is exactly the place where I've already said it's already listed in 4K, but you could insert the language that's in 4K over to to say the committee chair and superintendent or designee will set committee meeting agendas. So you don't need to have a line that says the superintendent's role is to support the work of the chair because you have it in I already.
Could you repeat the previous sentence?
So in I, as you have it right now, it says committee chairs plus one rotating committee member will discuss agendas with the superintendent and prepare agendas with the superintendent selected staff with the assistant of staff. I would take all of that out and just put in the committee chair and superintendent or designee will set committee meeting agendas. That's directly from 4K 2.
And that'll go in I. Committee chairs plus one rotating committee member.
No. Take all of that out and just put in the committee chair and superintendent or designee will set committee meeting agendas. It's from 4K 2.
Okay.
I would like
And
to
Jessica, bless your heart. I hope you're catching all this.
leave in the rotating chair member because I think that's a perfect opportunity for learning and growth. Just to go back to a board member, Tomarito, is like, what are we doing? How am I going to do this next year if I do want to become a committee chair? I think that's a good place to have a new member to kind of just model or mentor on what committee chairs do. So I would suggest leaving that part in.
Member Tomarito?
Yeah, I agree. I agree that I think that many times it's just one of these things that as we've come together in a meeting and we start talking and dialoguing, come to find out that it's somewhere else and written. And so it's just that clarification. And I thank you, Courtney, for clarifying that. But I also know that we just need to be a little more aware that figuring out where these things sit is all part of the process. And I'm glad we're having these conversations. So as we move forward, we just need to remember that we all are trying to get on the same page. And I just want to recognize that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I hear we're going to keep, we'll borrow the language from 4K2, insert it into I, but I hear a desire to keep plus one rotating committee member. And it speaks to the larger objective that I pointed out when we were introducing this meeting, or the purpose of this meeting. And that is for leadership capacity building. Especially for very busy people. So I'd like to go back to F, just right above I on that page. All meetings are open to the public and all meeting materials will be posted publicly 72 hours before the meeting all members are invited to submit questions. How many days before? Is it 14 days? Is it 10 days? Could someone remind
So-
us?
Well, so again, I think that's, I think we have a redundancy. Again, the 72 hours before the meeting is redundant to Open Meetings Act, Section 10-15-1F, which requires 72 hours, so I don't think it's necessary that it's in the document. And as far as the number of days, I believe that is in the board services procedures. And so it is also stated in our facilitator's guide where there's a 2-week timeline. So again, I would be concerned about being overly prescriptive. But I don't remember the exact date or number of days.
So I'm going to weigh in as someone who, again, I know that we are aware of what the Open Meetings Act says, but new members and the public who have access to this, I don't think we should have to go searching. This is just a courtesy to have this kind of information readily available. But I'll listen to, I'd like to hear from other board members.
The only thing I would say because I'm not seeing anybody unmute just yet. Again, the governance manual needs to be broad enough that it can flow from year to year. If there is a specific time, that is something that can be in a process, in a procedure, or in a how-to manual. If the need to know that it's 72 hours has to be specifically written out because for whatever reason, that can be in a how-to guide, that can be separate, but we need to professionalize this board a little bit. We're not in the business of leadership building. We are in the business of improving student outcomes. And our responsibility is to know our manuals, to know the statutes that pertain, to read the Open Meetings Act that is 2 pages, unless you want to go into the discussions where they give all sorts of different circumstances. It's our job to know this stuff. Our job is to know it so that we can be more efficient, so that we can improve student outcomes. So does 72 hours need to be in there? Whatever. But we have a job to do and we should do it.
Yeah, if I may jump in, you actually brought up a point that I was going to bring up, where it says all members are invited to submit questions. If we are talking about SOFG and our time tracking, I would change that language and put something a little bit more like we're not invited, we have to.
You
right?
are required, right?
Required. So if we're going to leave that in, I would say we're required, not invited, because then that can leave some room for different interpretations. But yeah, and then the number of days, I would again just ask staff. I looked for that number 2 and I don't have that exact number, but I did want to make sure that language, if we're keeping it, was SOFG correct.
I love that. All members are required to submit questions prior to the meeting. And I don't know that we need to insert number of days because it might be different for a board meeting versus a policy meeting versus a finance meeting versus an audit meeting. Like, I don't know if the committee, if the staff has different requirements. I think that's something that can be addressed in a board services procedure and not necessarily here in this document.
Okay, noted. So can we move on?
Yes, I would like to move on.
Yes.
So do we want to review G during its first meeting of the year? Is it important to note that the board will elect chairs by majority vote to the audit, finance, and policy committees?
I thought we already discussed this one, that it was going to be, well, at first we said during the first meeting that we were just going to leave it as standing committees. But then with the discussion that Art brought forth, this is possibly the place that we could change it to during the second business meeting of the year. The board will elect standing committee chairs, period.
Yeah, I agree with that statement.
I do too, Ronaldo.
Two standing committees. Great. Ready to move on? What about H? Committee chairs plus one rotating committee member will set. We've covered this, correct?
Yes.
Now, actually, this brought up a question for me, and so in setting committee meetings, there's a term calendaring that we learned at our meeting with the superintendent, a calendaring committee. So is there a meeting at the start of the year where the policy committee or the audit committee or all these committees set a calendar for the rest of the year? And what's the process for that? So we can write it down.
Board chair or Madam Chair, I'm not sure because I haven't been superintendent during that cycle, but I think I recall a meeting where the board all decided in January what day of the week all of the meetings were going to be on, and then we kind of calendar it from there. I don't know if Dr. Albright might know more specifics of how that's done. She has more calendaring the board experience than I do.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Superintendent Blakey. The board decides which day of the week, which day of the month, and how often the committees will meet after chairs have been selected. It's part of the requests asked during the election process.
So is that what we're referring to in H, would you say?
Yes, that the committee chairs will set regular committee meeting dates.
With the superintendent or designees.
Correct.
And we don't need or staff, right? Or do we?
We do not direct the staff.
Okay.
So if you put,
That's not what I'm getting at. That's that the committee, as it reads, it's redundant to say or designees or staff. So committee chairs plus one rotating committee member will set regular committee meeting dates with the superintendent or designees? Do we end it
Man,
there?
I think it happens as a board altogether, because if each one were to do it separately, we could have conflicting times of what, if the policy chair decided they wanted to do it Tuesdays at 5, and then separately the finance chair did the same thing, we would all be, so it's usually done as a whole. The board
Okay.
decides which days and months and how often, but it's usually done as a whole board conversation.
Right. So not necessarily committee.
Is that
Um,
correct?
I think best
So-
practice is that the committee chair says, I would like to have them on Tuesday mornings, at 7:30. And then they kind of, the board, but the purpose is that the board figures out those dates as a full board. So that it's not like piecemealed in different committee meetings. When are we going to meet? Because there's overlap of some of the committee members and of the staff to be able to have all the meetings as well. So it's usually a conversation that is done with the preference of when the chair would like to meet, but then everybody kind of works around which days and times to take. Is that correct, Dr. Albright?
Yes, and in the past, we've gathered that information in the board services office, and then it's brought to a board meeting for the whole board to agree on those dates and times, but it can also be a discussion within a meeting itself.
Within a committee meeting, Dr. Albright?
No, I'm sorry, within a board meeting, so that the entire board is part of that process, so that the overlap Dr. Blakey was just mentioning doesn't occur.
And Art, can I put you on the spot again? Is there a Open Meetings Act resolution that requires that so there's like something the president has to sign that says when all of our dates are? That we're required to submit a document signed by the president?
So if the board, excuse me, if the board as a whole says these are the dates that we will meet in conformity with notice of under the Open Meetings Act, that would be when the document would be signed by the board president. So I do.
So it's more, sorry to interrupt. So is it more guided by OMA in particular and board services secondary to help the board as a whole make this decision?
That's step one. And step two, if a committee has 4 voting members, then again, the Open Meetings Act controls. And I will say, if you said we will meet the first Monday of every month, and there was a decision to meet at an additional meeting, as long as you are in compliance with the Open Meetings Act, the committee, or they could agree not to have a meeting at all. Am I clear?
You cut out us for a minute. You said if there's a committee of 4 and they decide to meet outside of those established times, it's still considered a meeting?
It is 4 board members, and it would require open meetings notice that 4 board members are going to meet on the 15th Tuesday, no, on a different date than you set down in your original calendar.
It's a matter of just notifying a state entity,
Of
The
notifying
public.
the public.
Yes,
Okay, so if committees say we're gonna meet every other month, and then a committee says, no, not really, we need to meet outside of that, then as long as you make it public, you're okay.
Yes, my experience is that a number of smaller school districts meet once a month. And in January, they say, we will meet on the first Tuesday of every month during this year. And they will set out the first Tuesday of every month for the meeting, and they will give notice under the Open Meetings Act. We are more specific here because we're now saying not only will the board meet, but now committees will meet. And if you have 4 members and you say this is when you will meet, you must give notice under the Open Meetings Act.
Okay. So Art, can I just clarify 2 things then? So the first is, there is a resolution that the board once the times have been decided, there is a resolution that the board president has to sign and submit.
So if the board votes, president will sign the resolution upon which the board voted or what they voted on. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. And then second clarification. So if there is a committee of 4 and that committee meets with 3 and the 4th can't be there or didn't know about it, then does that constitute a meeting that notice should have been given?
This is, yes. It's like the board says we are going to meet. You give public notice. You have to have a quorum, however. There has to be a quorum. So if there are 4 members are a quorum or 4 members constitute the committee, you say we're going to meet, you give notice. Only 3 board members show up, you still have given notice to the public that there will be a meeting.
So you still have to give notice. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. But
Okay.
to this particular manual, well, we already talked about it. Committee chairs will set regular committee meeting dates. So that can be in a how-to guide because that's not necessarily a committee specific. That's more of a board issue, not necessarily a committee issue.
My understanding of the prior discussion was that the board as a whole will select the dates upon which committees will meet.
So then H can be removed because that's a board as a whole obligation.
Or it could say the board, instead of one rotating committee, the board will set regular committee dates, superintendent or designee. So at that meeting, whenever it's going to be, the superintendent could say, on Tuesdays, it would be great if the finance committee would meet. On Wednesdays, it would be great if the audit committee would meet, or so they don't conflict. I hope I'm.
Yes, you're making, yes.
Yeah, my only pushback on that part is that this section is about committees. And so if it's a board action, then it should be in a different section. And I think it's already discussed in 4K. So I don't know that H needs to be inserted.
Except that there are other meetings, am I correct, to set the agenda for, like how do agendas get set for like this meeting? There are regular meetings.
All right. Madam Chair, are you asking like how do we set agendas for committee meetings?
Yes.
typically like the finance committee and the audit committee, the staff that is connected to that committee sets the agenda, usually of items that have to be passed through the board for that month. And then they draft the agenda. We get all the documents, and then we meet with the chair of the committee to review the agenda before we send it out to the rest of the committee, the board.
Okay, so this H should actually read committee chairs plus one rotating committee member will set agendas with the superintendent or designees. Does that make sense in terms of what you just described?
Yes,
Well,
I
But you
believe.
have H and I that
Okay, yes,
committee dates are set by the whole board.
correct.
Committee agendas we've already discussed, and we're taking the language from 4K and inserting it.
Into
The
I.
majority of the committee wanted to keep plus one committee member. I think that actually makes things a lot harder and has some unintended consequences, but I will save that argument for November.
I do want to just get clarification for the staff about the plus one. Is it that they have to have another person or may have another person, primarily for finance and audit too, because it all happens, so fast, and a lot of those are really strict deadlines. If the committee chair doesn't have somebody for that meeting, the way it's written implies we couldn't set the agenda until we have one more board member at that meeting.
Right. So how can we plus one rotating committee member if available? I mean, I think it's important to have the language there again for leadership capacity building. But I definitely want to address the concern that you're raising.
So maybe something along the lines of, and an interested rotating committee member may be present, something like that.
Okay. Policy analyst, can you weigh in on language? Or is that fine?
Can add to may. I don't know. I mean, right now, I don't know if there's anything that prevents the chair from bringing another person with them. It could say, as the board committee member Astorga just said, we could word it in that way. Or it could be part of the handbook that, best practice is to ask another board member to join you in setting the agenda for a committee meeting. Because it sounds like there's like a best practice kind of handbook that is being created.
It seems to me that this is more of a best practice that could go into a handbook, simply because we're trying to create a manual that generates efficiency. And I'm worried about unintended consequences of requiring a rotating board member, specifically to what Superintendent Blakey just said, but also, specifically the discussion that we've also had about committees are open for membership to all board members. There's nothing that precludes any board member from participating. It's our elected responsibility to participate. So there's nothing that precludes anybody at this point. So to address the concerns of I'd like to learn and learn about committees, it's more of a best practice is more of a process instead of a necessary policy, in my opinion. I guess my theme here is we need to keep this as streamlined as possible, simple as possible. And that if there are any particulars that are important to this board, that those get put into a how-to guide.
Does anyone, board member, Tom Warito?
And I'm only saying this because I took on audit, and being a new board member, it was very helpful that the staff went ahead and draft those agendas until I learned the process. And then it was one of understanding, okay, this all happens before we do this and do that. But in the beginning, I was just glad they did it and they put it together. And so that was very helpful for me as somebody who is new to this whole thing. And so it's one of coming in to recognize, and it's also just asking for help when you need it, and that the board, you know, the staff and those who are working for us, or those members who are helping us, that it's very helpful too. When you can have those decisions that need to be made, they guide you through it. That's all I need to say.
You know, we also have mentors, you know, if to speak to the leadership building, sorry, I swallowed a peanut. We have mentors that are meant to help with all of that as well.
I'd like to speak to the issue of efficiency, because I think if, again, which is what leadership capacity building is about, so that you have somebody in the wings ready to step into a role and not suffer the confusion that board member Tom Warito just pointed out. And someone who can just not skip a beat, and frankly, several. But I think we're ready to move. Board member Astorga, are you satisfied with the discussion that we've had on this topic already?
Yes, I'm ready to go to the next item.
Okay, great. So now we're on, I think we've already covered 4K2 is going to get inserted here, is my understanding. Is that correct? Yes. So that leaves, I think we're done. J has been. Did I hear somebody?
Are we done with the document or done with that section?
Done with this, J. Okay, so moving on to number 2, the board will elect members by majority vote to serve on national, state, and local boards. This wording came as a result of our board member Tom Warito and I, when we attended the Council of Great City Schools and spoke to leadership there. They revealed that their serving board members were elected by the board at large. And if I remember correctly, that was the case with the previous board. So, yes, conversation.
Nobody? Okay, I'll jump in. So I think this language is incredibly broad. It seems like an attempt to limit board participation. I'm not sure what problem this is trying to solve. I'm also concerned with how it actually aligns with our SOFG community engagement and outreach principles, in that we are actually required to participate in community organizations. I guess another question is which boards? Like, this is so general, it serves on national, state, and local boards. All general? What if I get asked to participate in a national board? Do I have to get permission of this board in order to participate? 4P, which is our community engagement policy, talks about the need for us to go out and have two-way engagement. And also, for H. Oh, also, I believe that I can't find the exact one right now, but I believe that the board president has the authority to set participation. So again, I don't understand what the point of this addition is, because it seems like it's an attempt to limit board participation. It's very, very broad.
Well, Courtney, and I'm only saying this just based on what Board Member Dominguez stated. One is that when elected and sitting on an executive board for a particular, especially the New Mexico SB, and also the Council of All Great City Schools, it's great that the president would nominate and put you on there. But the thing is, many times with the board, we have no idea what's going on that level and what you're voting on. So when we then go to a meeting where you're not present and we sit there, then all of a sudden everybody's questioning us about what you voted on and whatever action you took. So that leaves us in a predicament, because we're sitting there going, I have no idea, because nobody told us about it. And so that leaves us in a predicament when it comes to explaining any actions, any vote taken. And maybe if Danielle would put in her president's report that this is what we voted on, this is what we did, that there is some sort of communication.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems unilateral when those things are done without us even knowing. So whether that's to clarify within this particular section here is also asking that we as a board are completely aware of some of these, because there's votes taken and those votes reflect us as a board. So my thing is how do we as a board become a little more clear in what these outside organizations and actions that are being taken place? Because we're the one that get questioned because of the relationships we have with other school boards. And then they come back on us.
So I think that's a different topic than this piece right here. I do understand your concern, Board Member Tomorito, but I do think that that's more of a clarification on communication on whoever sits on different boards. I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with the specific point of the board will elect members by majority vote to serve on national, state, and local boards. But I do want to get back to your point about communication, and I think we can talk about it. But I also share the concern that Board Member Jackson has, because it's so vague that even if I am on a board in my personal life that's a national state board, it assumes that I would still have to come to the APS board and be approved to sit on that board. So I would like to clean up the language a little bit on that and specify what boards we're talking about and what that process looks like. And then I'll just go back to Board Member Jackson, because I know that you wanted to say something too.
Yeah, so I think two things to address the issue. So which I think you just said, Board Member Storka, that this particular line, the board will elect members by majority vote, blah, blah, blah. That's actually not the role of that. That has nothing to do with committees, right? So this line shouldn't, if it's something that's important to the whole board, it shouldn't be in committees, because this is talking about elections to national, state, local boards. So it shouldn't be here, period. Secondly, I agree that we do need to communicate back. And just in defense of myself, every single time I have gone to as a representative of APS, I have put together a feedback of what was discussed, and it went out in the at-a-glances. So my communication has been there, why I did something, how it aligned with APS, how I represented the vision and values of our board and our community. I've done that. That being said, again, this is the communication issue. And I think a lot of what's happening is there's a feeling that there isn't communication. And from what I understand, there is a committee that is formed right now that's tasked with working on communication issues. What needs to be communicated to the board? How do we get information back from the board? How do we get information from the community? How do we share it with not only with the community, but with the board? There's a committee that is supposed to be working on this policy. So we can take this concern about how is representation on outside boards brought back. That can be shared through a communication document that policy that committee puts together. So again, this line doesn't need to be in here because this doesn't pertain to committees. And I'll just jump forward and say the second line where it says APS board members who serve on the aforementioned boards will have any votes they cast reflect of the APS Board of Education. We already have agreed to that in our board guardrail number 4. So again, that doesn't need to be stated because board guardrail number 4 says no board member will represent or appear to represent through their words or actions the voice of the entire board on matters that the board has not publicly adopted. So if I'm a member of the board and I'm going to NMSBA and I'm talking about student outcomes focused governance, that's totally within the realm of what our APS board is focusing on. So again, my suggestion is to remove both of those lines, put some of that information into a communication document, and specifically Council of Great City Schools. Our documents say that it is actually the board president who is the representative or their designee. So I am serving as the designee of the board president.
Thank you, Board Member Jackson. And I agree that this does not belong under the committee section, but there needs to be a section where we address this, because I think, again, in the name of democratizing the process, there was a time when the board as a whole selected, and it was, it's done very collaboratively. We all voice an interest in various, I don't know how to refer to these, some help from staff. They are they APS board partnerships? What's the terminology here?
Madam Chair, I'm not sure.
I think we had something with MERCOG, the Symphony, New Mexico.
There's a
School Board
procedural
Association.
document that lists all of them. There's a procedural document that lists everything and lists the requirements, I believe.
So, yes, we'll remove
right,
it from
Dr.
this
Albright?
section.
Just going to point out the language we use is the board members' participation in organizations. It's very simple.
Thank you, Dr. Albright, for the fancy wording.
In organizations. I don't know that we get any more specific with that, but okay. So are we in agreement that this does not belong in the section?
Yes.
Yes.
I
Great,
agree.
great.
I'm gonna have to excuse myself. I'm in Oregon right now. I have to get to an event. So I do apologize. So I need to leave.
Thank you, Board Member Tomarito, for making it.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, section 3, well, which will be section 2 or number 2. Let's remove number 2 above. The board president or a majority of the board may appoint additional committees outside the purview of committee chairs, including ad hoc committees made up of board members, etc. I'm not going to read the rest of that because the only addition was outside the purview of committee chairs. And that is put there so that the board president is not crosswise with committee chairs and their work. Discussion on that?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Board Member Esberg.
No, I just said I don't have any comments on that one.
I guess I don't, I'm not totally clear on what this language is attempting, again, what problem it's trying to solve. Like how is appointments, how could that be crosswise? I guess I don't understand the.
Well, I think it refers directly to what happened to the policy committee back in January, whereby there was a suggestion that the policy committee, and this was a coaching suggestion that the policy committee be phased out and that it would become, we would deal with policy in ad hoc with an ad hoc approach. And so that proceeded to derail the efforts to have a policy committee meeting when we wanted to talk about these things, the items on this agenda.
Yeah, so the problem that it
So
solved, Board Member Jackson, is that if there's work that's being done that's similar to the committee, right? So if there's policy work, like the policy diet, for example, that's being done outside of policy committee meetings, then that's okay, basically, is like, so it doesn't get crossed in. Because I think there was some misunderstanding of, well, at least for my part, why is a policy diet not being part of the policy committee? So this just brings in language where it kind of shares some of that, where there can be an ad hoc committee created or some other type of whatever committee created to do some of that work, if that makes sense to you.
we did, you know, and I have to say we it was a bumpy transition, I'll just say that, into this year's work. I think it was a missed opportunity, frankly, the policy diet ad hoc committee work. It was a missed opportunity to onboard and to teach about SOFG to the new board members. And so I think that's what we have to have in the forefront of our minds when we're going through this, or at least that's what's in the fore of my mind, because we do have elections often, every 2 years. And how we preserve the institutional knowledge that's gained in 4 years and pass it on is what I'm trying to address here.
So I see Ashley's beautiful face. Could you help me? I think I still need some clarification.
Yeah, so one of the things I want to address is so there was not at any point a recommendation, a coaching recommendation made that the board sunset any specific committee. There is definitely a coaching recommendation that the board consider a committee diet process, which is something that the board has, that the board chair previous to now, so back in early in 2023, the board chair as an individual decided what committees should be sunset, and then conversations were had with those committees, and they decided that those committees would stay or they would go. That was not at any point, there was never coaching that said this committee should stay or this committee should go. I want to be clear on that because as a coach, I do not decide or tell you all what decisions you should make. I only help guide you to make the decisions that are going to work best for this board. With regard to the policy diet was it was conducted by an ad hoc committee that was previous board. It was board president when she was the policy committee chair, Danielle Gonzalez, and then Barbara Peterson, who's former board member. The two of them came together and they did the overall, they facilitated the committee diet, but it was still a process that the board oversaw. And just with the work of any committee, committees exist to facilitate the work of the whole board. And so if there is work that the board feels that the entire board needs to be part of, then that probably should not be work that is delegated to a committee. It should be work that the board as a whole undergoes as a group. And so first of all, that's just one thing that I want to make sure that everyone is clear on. Does anyone have questions about that process before I move forward? Okay. So then the next is that just a general regard to understanding SOFG and SOFG processes. I have made it a point to try to extend invitations from the beginning of this board being this new board being assembled, opportunities for individuals to have one-on-one conversations with me, opportunities to have questions answered, opportunities to get one-on-one coaching. I've made myself available through board meetings. If that is not working, then I'm absolutely open to other opportunities or other ways that may work better for the board. If having those one-on-one options or having those small group meetings. I know that we tried to do one of those and it didn't really work out as well, but we could definitely try that again if that is the desire of the board.
Thank you, Ashley. I do want to clarify, though, that there was a suggestion in January at the January 2024 meeting that I was part of. There was a suggestion that the policy committee would eventually be phased out, and that the work would be a suggestion that it would be done through ad hoc. And so our board president took that to heart. And as a result, we were shuttered after the March policy meeting. So I want to get back to the language here, and that is that if we have committees, then they should be allowed to work, to do the work that they are assigned to do. And that's the point of the board president may appoint additional committees outside the purview of the existing standing committees and committee chairs. And I think it's important to clarify that because of what happened in January.
I'm
And
sorry, I
so
thought
we
you
can
were finished.
take that to a discussion to the board, but I really don't, I mean, this is here for discussion from committee members. And so I heard from board member Jackson and board member Astorga. And can we move on? And
I mean, I don't think that language needs to be there. I understand that you do, and board member Astorga weighed in that she wants to have it there as well. I think that this is a discussion that needs to move to the full board if we cannot find agreement on this. But again, well, I'll save my argument for later.
okay, I'd like to move on. And move into 4J policy, board policy scope and development. The board will create and adopt, and this shows educational or governance policy for Albuquerque Public Schools. We've added educational or governance policy. And later we added, the board may develop, review, and revise any governance policy established by the board through a majority vote of members. The board may also suspend or revoke any policy established by the board that is not specifically prescribed by federal or state statute through a majority vote of board members. Is there any discussion about the clarifications?
So I definitely need clarification, and this might be a request to meet with Ms. Martinez actually, other than discussing it here, but I'm having a hard time with the difference between educational policies and then our board policies. So I know our board policies are our goals and guardrails, right? That's what the board has created. But there's this gap between information of on our website, on our roles and responsibilities, it says we create policy. And then when I bring up creating policy as a board member, that is said that I don't do that our policy analyst does that, right? So I still need some clarification on what my role is as a board member when it comes to policy and what is an educational policy. So that's just kind of like a tidbits that hopefully I can meet with Ms. Martinez and go over that just for myself. But also the second part is I really want to be clear to the public on what our role is when it comes to policy and that our policies are the goals and guardrails. So that does mean changing some of the language, right? Because it does say we are the ones creating that policy and what those educational policies are. Another request that I had, and this is just a good time to bring it up, so I'm going to bring it up, is I really am hoping that the RFI committee is working on a way to understand school policies, like local school policies and district policy, and if there's any way for us to align them, because I know that some schools have reached out saying that they have certain policies that may not be aligned with our district policy when it comes to restorative justice, things like that. So I'm hoping that there's some type of RFI happening to kind of figure that out, but also what is my role as a board member to go to those community members who are bringing that to my attention and let them know what is or what is not happening. So I have a lot of questions about what that is. So thank you for bringing that up, and hopefully I can meet with staff soon to figure that out.
Well, thank you, Member Storga, because I'm hoping that it's not just you that benefits from that conversation. I think it would benefit all of us to hear. It's good to hear from new members, to see where the gaps are, to see what we need to do, whether it's in a handbook or in the governance manual, right? So I appreciate your comments, and yeah, if you do have those private conversations, suggest that they come to the board as a whole. I'd like to move on, because
Wait.
I'm
Sorry, I
sorry.
didn't get to
I'm
weigh
sorry.
in. You won't be surprised. I don't think that educational and governance actually need to be in this spot, because it is already redundant to what we have in 4D1 and 4D3. And the fact that it does already state that we have to create and adopt in relation to applicable laws and regulations. So again, simply inserting words doesn't necessarily bring clarity, because the clarity is already well defined in other areas of the document. So my suggestion is to actually remove the words educational or governance, and then in the third line down, governance, leave it the way it was. Because also, if you look at number 1 in 4J, it very clearly lays out which policies we are adopting, and that is those that are required by law, or those that are an appropriate exercise of the board's oversight authority as defined by the board's adopted goals and guardrails. So I think actually, for the sake of clarity, I think adding educational, adding those 3 words actually makes it less clear. And I think we just needed to leave it as is. And then just as a comment to Member Astorga, not only, well, to anybody who's listening, like, not only talk to Miss Martinez, but seriously take AJ and Ashley up on their offer. I always walk away from talking to both of them with more of an insight, and I think if you can talk to them about what the difference is, and then talk again, because really sometimes it does take a while to wrap your head about what this is we're doing, especially because the word policy is so nebulous. I really think those continued conversations really will help. So my suggestion is to remove those 3 words.
Thank you for that. So I'm gonna noted, and I think this is a good discussion point. I went back to let's see, 4D3 in our governance manual, and I have the same question. To create and adopt district policy, well, what does that mean, right? Governance, educational. So I think it's a conversation worth pursuing. Thank you both. So I'd like to move on to the whole notion of first meeting and / readings, second meeting / readings when we are considering and adopting proposed new policies or policy amendments. And I'm going to ask, I'm going to jump from accordingly. Number 1, the board limits its adoption, etc. Number 2, existing, we got rid of educational policies. Existing policies that do not meet one of these criteria. And now I'm down to ensure that policies, the paragraph just before first meeting, To ensure that policies are well examined before final action, the board will adhere to the following meeting sequence in considering and adopting proposed new policies or policy amendments. The "or" here is critical. So any adopting new policies or policy
Sorry, Chair
amendments.
Dominguez, we don't have
Yes.
any edits in this section.
No, I understand. We're going to talk about what these mean, though, because we have failed to comply with this section. We passed in the action report, I pointed out that there have been three either three new policies or amendments to our governance manual, and we have skipped the 30 days public comment period. And so I think it's important to note in this policy committee meeting, that can't continue. Let's see, let me find my action report. Since its adoption, the manual has been updated 3 times, once to include language regarding the superintendent's evaluation, another time to designate the board president as a contact for legal counsel, and a third time to correct an omission stating that the board's vice president can sign for the president in case of an absence. The latter is probably the most minor, but the first 2 are critical. And we need to, I'm just making this a public statement. We need to abide by this. We're going to this time around, but it does concern me that in the transition into new officers and new chairs, this got overlooked. And so that's my comment and my reminder to all that we need to abide by this policy, by our policy. So I'm going to jump to 4K board agendas, and this is the last section. The board president, the executive committee, and the superintendent or designee will set regular and special meeting agendas. That actually, I skipped over one. Right under board agendas, board meetings will comply with the New Mexico Open Meetings Act, and it's listed there, and the Open Meetings Act resolution of the board for public notification of meetings. The meeting schedule and agendas are posted on the APS website at aps.edu. The aps.edu was added, I think, just out of courtesy. I think in the Q&A, somebody suggested that we didn't need to add this. I responded that I think it was there in the original, and it seems like a courtesy. At the moment, it seems to serve a good purpose, but there are heftier ideas to address. But Member Astorga, would you like to weigh in?
I think it's fine having the website there. I mean, it flows, it's fine. And then for the second one, for the board president and the executive committee, I appreciate having that there too, just because I am on the executive committee. I mean, we do approve the agendas, but we don't always set them. So, and we do have conversations about what's going to be on the agenda. So it's nice just to be included since it's kind of already happening.
So just to be particular about language, it's the board president, the executive committee, and the superintendent or designee will set regular and special meeting agendas. That's actually in conflict with 4H, because 4H says that the president and the superintendent set the agenda and the vice president and the secretary assist. And so I actually don't think that the phrase the executive committee needs to be there, because that agenda setting procedure or designation is listed in 4H, and it's actually throughout the documents that it's actually the president and the superintendent who set the agenda, but it's the executive committee assists. So again, you know, contract language, if you're gonna change it in one section, that means you have to go back and change it in the other. But I do also believe that that's statutory as to who sets the agenda, and I believe it's the board president and the superintendent. So my point is, I don't think executive committee needs to be in there.
Madam Chair, just
Also-
a point of clarification, the website of aps.edu isn't an addition. It just comes up as like the blue underline link in the formatting. So it was never taken off and then re-added. It's just when you put in a website, it defaults to being blue, which is the same color as the changes.
The other thing that I noted in this section is that it looks like it got defaulted to little b, so 4K1B, where the committee chair and superintendent or designee will set committee meeting agendas. Looks like that got deleted for some reason. It shouldn't be deleted. It should be put back to number 2, because we've actually used that language. We just inserted it into the committee meeting agenda section. So that part that says, so where it's little b needs to be deleted and moved back to number 2.
Okay. Any other comments or observations?
Sorry, tell me when we can move on, because I want to go back and clarify something.
So, yeah, I want to clarify something about the board president and the executive committee. So, and I need Art to weigh in on this. If the committee is made of 3, it's the president, vice president, and secretary. And again, in the name of onboarding, this is the purpose of this language, to give executive committee members an opportunity to be part of or part of a process. But how does this violate OMA, the Open Meetings Act, in any way? Because
just for clarification, the executive committee currently approves the agenda. So all of the agendas that are met or that are created do go to the executive committee for approval before it goes to the full board. That's the current process of where the executive committee is in the agendas. And then Mr. Melendres, do you know the answer to if having the executive committee set the agenda, if that is in conflict with the Open Meetings Act? You're on mute.
Sorry. Having 3 members of a 7-member board meet is not in violation of the Open Meetings Act.
Thank you. So, and I want to go back for some clarification to what Superintendent Blakey just said. The executive committee approves the agenda. Is that correct? I guess what I'm after here is having them be part of the conversation.
Correct. Well, the current, the current process is that the agendas are set and it's sent to them and they could add or delete based off of where the agenda is. Because of SOFG, it's really, limited in a positive way. The agenda items being added are the progress monitoring calendar essentially. And then usually there's anything that is legally that we need to go through is added to those agendas. And then, for committee meetings such as finance and audit, those are pretty much drafted by staff and presented to the committee chair. So for the regular agenda, regular board meetings, the agendas usually are set with progress monitoring. And then any agenda items that board members have either brought to the president or the executive committee has information to add, then that is how that is currently modified in the current process for the role of the president, the superintendent, and the executive committee.
Member Storga, did you want to weigh in at all?
No, I mean,
Okay.
that is how it happens. And like I said, we also sometimes do have conversations in executive committee meetings of if there's anything that we want to add or not. So I don't know. I'll leave that one up to you.
And I will say, I believe, well, so again, this is about being part of the conversations that happen with the superintendent around agendas, just being in the room, so to speak, and getting a feel for to address leadership capacity, transparency, to not feeling so siloed and out of the loop, which is a concern that has come up over and over again. So,
Madam Chair, just the current process, I believe there's not like necessarily a formal meeting to sit down and create those agendas. They're really, I believe the executive committee meets separately. The superintendent isn't in those meetings when they kind of talk about if there's topics that they need to add and such. And then they let us know based on their conversations if we need to add anything to the agenda other than the progress monitoring or the, legal things that we have to add. So in my, couple months experience in the agendas, it's staff going to the president and saying these are things that we need to be put on the agenda for, compliance and progress monitoring.
okay.
So it sounds like, again, from a document perspective, that the language in the document does allow for participation from the executive committee elsewhere. And so to be specific about board agendas and using the term set, I would still remove the executive committee from that, strike that from there, because the setting of the agenda is particular. The assisting is outlined in 4H.
And I think, is there one more? Thank you. Thank you for that, Wayne and Jeanette.
There's some stuff
item
on the front
4.
page that we've missed.
On the front page?
Yeah.
Well, before we jump to the
The-
front page, can we just wrap up this? There's one more edit on under this board agendas. It's number 4. Board members will have up to 4 business days before the meeting to request items be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the action agenda for discussion, et cetera, et cetera. It
So
reiterates,
I think that's just reiterating what's in 4M. But the only concern I have about that is with the addition of, which I'm fine with, if you want to leave business day, business is not listed in 4M. In 4M number 7, all it says is board members will have up to 4 days. But in this iteration, it says 4 business days. So again, we need to be consistent.
and I think I might have put that in there because I tried to address something on the consent agenda and was reminded that it was 4 business days. So I think it's a good clarification.
All right, so then leave that clarification there, but make a note that it needs to be
Yes.
updated in 4M.
In 4M,
Or M7.
yes, got it. Okay, we're going back per board member Jackson's suggestion to, did we miss something?
Yeah, we missed,
Oh,
so
yes.
yeah, where New Mexico statute requires that boards of education have finance and audit committees, the board may establish additional standing committees. Then there's 2 separate additions.
Mhm.
The first, sorry, board member Astorga, I see you came off. Did I jump in? Okay. It says the APS Board of Education, recognizing its statutory obligation to develop educational policies for the school district, includes the policy committee as one of its standing committees. My notes on this were, we do not need to formally recognize. We don't need to make a formal recognition. It's currently listed in 4D3. Policymaking is done with the full board and through SOFG and through our community outreach and engagement. It's also already listed in 4I2B. Also, given that we have not gone through the formal committee diet process, why would we add this in now? How does this pass the committee diet questions? So essentially, I think that that whole line needs to be struck as a formal recognition because it is listed elsewhere as policy. It was also in the original document that said board members may serve on the following committees, where it listed finance, policy, and audit. So I don't know why we wouldn't just leave the original document that had them listed for now.
I thought you want, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it's important to be intentional. And I think this goes back to the conversation that we had earlier about policy committee kind of being put off. So I think this is intentionally put there to make sure that we know that we have 3 policies, right? I mean, we have 3 committees. And since we are a board that quote unquote sets policy or creates policy or whatever you want to call it, it's important to have all 3 of those committees present. So just like we have finance and audit committee here, even though it's not a statute, I feel like the importance as APS board members to talk about policy and be vigilant about what policies are being put out district-wide is important, at least to me, in that sense. I don't know if board member Dominguez, you have different thoughts.
No, I agree. I agree completely with that. Intentionality is, I think has been missing. So I like the wording.
But I guess I just don't understand if the original, so I'm looking at my original document where it's 4I. 4I right now says New Mexico statute requires that boards of education have a finance and audit subcommittee. The board may establish additional standing committees, period. Then if you go down to number 2, it lists what our committees are. It says finance, policy, audit. So I guess I don't understand the need for a formal recognition in the sentence above when policy is actually listed. Addition to that, well, I just lost my train of thought. It is listed. So
I think there was a cleanup that went on there. We did list, because let's see, where did we list those 4 committees? We just took them out of that section and incorporated them into G. We could incorporate them up here, add the finance, audit, policy committee. Just cleans up the document. The original.
But that might not work because we're not required to have a policy committee. So we can't just list it.
Well, I think there is a statutory, I found it, and I don't. Hold on.
we're not required to have a policy committee. 22-5-4 says that we have a duty to create policy. It doesn't say we have a duty to have a policy committee. So all I'm going to say is it seems cleaner the way it was, but I'm getting tired.
To bring this back up into our November meeting, but I do feel like I do like the way it says that we have a policy committee because we're obligated to develop educational policies. If we end up changing that somehow or having a more clarity on our role when it comes to developing policies, then I'd be willing to change that. But right now, as like I said, in every document that you read, and especially to the public, that is our role. So I like having that in there and also being intentional, like because this is part of our role as board members, we have a policy committee that reflects that. So I'd be willing to save this conversation if that's something that we need to do.
Like take it to the board in November.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Or to a second reading, yes.
Mhm.
Broaden the conversation. So, yeah, I think it's important to take it to the public and get some input and continue the conversation. Okay. Have we covered it all?
No, the next sentence says the board recognizes the governance manual as a living policy document requiring continuous review and revision to accommodate the board's needs and its implementation of student outcomes focused governance. Again, my notes on this is I think that this is unnecessary language and it strangely seems to come straight from the CBA. I would suggest that even if this is something that we think it's important, it doesn't belong in this section. This is more
What's a CBA? I'm sorry.
collective bargaining agreement.
Okay.
This is not committee work. This is board work. The governance manual is board work, so it shouldn't be in this committee section. And if it is something that we as a full board feel is important as we address the governance manual, then maybe that's something that we look at adding to a different section when we discuss this in November. That, you know, maybe we add a requirement that the governance manual is reviewed once a year during our annual self-evaluation. But this particular sentence shouldn't be in the committee section.
I agree that we can move the sentence somewhere else.
And where did you suggest? Or did you suggest moving it into another section?
I think, I mean, just an early suggestion, and I would have to review it, but in 4D, under board responsibilities, it says that we added as a number 7, for example. Under the board will monitor student outcomes focused governance, student outcomes focused goals and guardrails. The board will adhere to the board guardrails. The board will review the board governance manual once a year. Something like that.
So I noted that, moved to section 4D, possibly number 7. I think it was here because this was about, I mean, the governance manual is policy. It is a living document, and because it's in its infancy, I would argue. That was the thinking. That it
is
it's still-
policy, but this is the committee section, and we need to really stay away from making the committee section particular about policy. This is not about the policy committee. This is about finance, audit, and policy committee. It's about all 3. And so if you have a sentence in there that is very focused on just one of those committees, it's not adhering to.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Okay. Any other sections?
I think what I would request, if Jessica's still there, if she hasn't gone to bed, can you read back to us all of the amendments that you think that we talked about?
Yes, and I will ask for the committee's support on a couple of the items where we left things a little ambiguous, but I will start from the top. Guessing that we approve the name change from board committees to board committees and committee chairs, roles and responsibilities. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. The change on paragraph 2 for the superintendent's role is addressed in 3B. That will be struck, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Third paragraph down. We are keeping the addition of the APS Board of Education, recognizing its statutory obligation to develop education policies for the school district, includes the policy committee as one of its standing committees. I see a misspelling there on, it should be 1. We will correct that. This is also addressed in 4D3 that we can look at as we go into November. The addition of the board recognizes the governance manual as a living policy document will come out for now because we are going to review this section for addition somewhere else in November, correct? Okay. I'm going to move down to E, and here's where things get fun. All right. These are open for membership to all board members and board members throughout the year and are appointed and are first appointed during, but not limited to, the first business meeting of the year.
No.
No.
So it's committees are open for membership to all board members, period.
Oh.
We
Gotcha.
struggled
Okay.
with appointment.
Okay, so all right, so we're gonna leave it there. The rest is struck.
Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you, Bertha. Moving on to F. All meetings are open to the public and all meetings materials will be posted 72 hours before the meeting. All members are required to submit questions prior to the meeting, and we are taking out the X number of days.
Are we also removing 72 hours since that's in OMA?
Okay.
I struggle with that because I'd like to have a discussion. Leave it in and just open to discussion. I'd like to hear more from new committee members.
Open to discussion in November.
On 72 hours before the meeting.
So,
Leave it in.
Yes, for November meeting.
all right, moving on to G. During the first business meeting of the year, the board will elect standing committee chairs. Period.
Second.
I think that's
During-
when we changed that said
Oh,
during the
second.
second business meeting of the year, the board will elect standing committee chairs, period.
Oh, okay, sorry, yeah, I have that as a second part of that sentence, but it is just that first brief sentence. Okay. H, committee chairs. Plus interested rotating committee members, correct? Will or may attend meetings to set committee dates with the superintendent or designee.
Well, not I like the way you said it, plus, read that again, please.
Committee chairs plus one interested rotating committee member may attend meetings with the superintendent to set agendas.
I think the may
Yes.
is in the wrong place because it's saying that the committee chair may,
May
I
set,
think that say that the rotating member
that's
may.
the person that may,
Yeah.
yeah.
right. But I like the way you handled that.
Well,
Plus
I
one
sorry,
interested.
sorry. So I thought H was about setting meeting dates I thought we struck that because committee meeting dates are set by the board as a whole.
Mm.
So I thought that we struck H and then went to I, that was the committee chairs plus one rotating, whatever that language was. We'll discuss agendas with the superintendent,
You're right, Member Jackson. Thank you.
right?
Yes, because
So-
we did go back to it in the next one.
Mhm.
So
So
now we
strike
are
H.
striking H. Moving on to I, and here's where we add committee chairs plus an interested rotating committee member. Will discuss agendas with the superintendent and designee.
And
prepare
that's where you would
agendas.
add the plus one is a may.
Well, it's plus one interested,
Right, but they don't
And-
need to be there. So just be
Mhm.
cautious about that language.
right?
So just to clarify, committee chairs plus one interested rotating committee member may discuss agendas. Do we want to clarify that to make sure we're not saying the committee chair may?
Yeah,
Maybe
additional member may?
the committee chair and the superintendent, it might have to be two sentences.
two
Will
sentences.
the agenda, and it says the committee chair may have a rotating member attend as like
Right.
a separate sentence.
There you go.
So what if we do, committee chairs will discuss agendas with the superintendent and designee, period. The chair may have an additional interested member present.
Yes.
That sounds good.
Okay, sorry, just a second. I'm just making sure I have that right. All right. We are striking F. We are striking 2, which is the board members will elect by majority. Number 3 becomes number 2. We are keeping the language that says outside the purview of committee chairs. Under 4J, first paragraph, we are keeping the educational or governance and governance additions.
I thought we were removing those. because it's stipulated in one. I
Okay,
thought we were removing those.
Well, I thought we were gonna pursue more discussion about this from a broader,
Yes.
from
I
the
recall that
board.
we said, keep it and it would go on first read and review in November. That was my understanding.
Okay,
Mhm. Mhm.
that's fine.
Correct.
Okay. Going down to under accordingly, number 2, we are striking the educational, that's a strike of a strike. So just ignore that. There is no educational language in number 2. Going down to 4K. Number 1, we are striking the executive committee. Yes,
Are we? I thought,
We were because we were being particular about the language where it says the board president and the superintendent set. Given the fact that
sorry, board
if
member. Sorry, go ahead.
that the problem that was trying to be solved from your statement was that the executive committee needed to participate in the agenda making
Conversation.
process, and they
right.
do. They do. So it doesn't need to be stated here because this is a very particular agenda setting. Setting is the terminology. They assist, they participate, they don't set. And that language is determined in somewhere
Well,
over here.
I mean, the set is part of the original language, right?
Yes.
What I'm saying, yes, what I'm saying is that the executive committee does not set the agenda. They assist, they participate, they don't set. And the language says set.
Okay, but I mean, I don't think it's
So-
about expanding. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we also got a little bit of clarification too, because the superintendent said that there is not a specific meeting that is happening where the agenda items are being put for review or conversation. It's the staff bringing it to the board president, and then the executive committee also has some discussion around it at times, but we also, as executive committee, have to approve the agenda. So there is really no need to put that there because there's not an actual procedure where there's a conversation or a meeting happening. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Superintendent.
That is correct. And there is somewhere in the governance manual, I can't remember the exact number, that does speak to the executive committee meeting to discuss. It's in another section where it talks about the role of the executive committee.
Okay.
4H.
All right.
4H.
4H.
So we don't strike.
So we are striking the executive.
Yes.
All right. I have a question on B. We had struck the committee chair and superintendent or designee will set committee meeting agendas. And my note here is to move this back to number 2, but which number 2?
So where it's little b right now, like in the amended documents, it's 1 little b. In the original document, it's actually number 2. So it just needs to move back to number 2. So number 1, number 2. So that would make the next one that says consent agenda number 3.
It's 3. Yeah.
Like they all go back to their original
Gotcha.
numbers.
So this will be number 1, the board president, 2, the committee chair, 3, consent agenda items.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Let's see.
And number 4,
Becomes number 4.
yes, is any item listed on a consent agenda may be removed, et cetera, et cetera.
And 4 becomes 5. We are keeping that addition. Let's see.
4 business days.
Yeah, we're leaving it up to 4 business days, and then this will go on the first read for review in November.
And you
Right.
also need to note that 4M number
Yes.
7
That
will
will
need to have business.
For
head.
in November. Gotcha.
Yep.
All right. Anything I've missed?
I think so.
I think you got it all. God bless you.
So I just want to check in on chair committee and processes, chair and committee processes, procedures. Board orientation needs to address the election of officers and committees, the how and the why and the specifics there. We need to address legislation versus governance duties, how to set a committee date, going to the superintendent. And then I've got number 4 is 4I, 1F. I'll figure that out later. 4I.
This all meetings are open to the public and all meeting materials will be posted publicly.
I'm not
All
sure why I
members.
listed that.
I have
Well,
a couple.
I'll pardon me?
I have a couple other items that I wanted to bring up.
Okay. And then to do is a critical is January calendaring for the board and committee meetings. Just explaining that process and something that came out of another meeting suggesting monthly meetings and then being able to cancel them if necessary. Clarifying, I think we need to clarify OMA, Open Meetings Act with regard to committees. And then best practices. Well, that's it. Never mind. We're going to keep the rotating members in the language. Go ahead, Member Astorga.
Yeah, some of the other things that I wanted to add, and you had onboarding there too, and some of those trainings, but what was also brought up is the informational sessions for candidates that wanted to become board members. I wanted just to flag that because I think that's important for candidates to know about SOFG, the governance manual, and all of that has to go on as a board member. So I think that's important. The other thing that board member Tomarito really stressed was wanting to know more about processes and procedures as a board member during those first couple of months for new board members. So that's something that's important. Another thing that I think would really benefit, especially the new board members, is a governance manual study session just to go over all of these things. So that could be just something apart that we can suggest for board members.
And I don't know if either one of you said this, the RFI committee, the request for information committee,
Yes.
that's crucial.
Yes, I did have a request, so I can put that
Oh,
in
yes.
email
There it
as
is.
well.
Yeah, understanding school policy versus district policy. I put that came up under RFI. I don't know
Yeah, that
how,
was
but
my suggestion. So I wanted clarity on if there was any way to see how school policies and district policies were aligned and making sure that we're all following the same model within policy or SOFG or however you want to call it, but making sure that we're all on the same page and what that process looks like, if there's any, right? I don't know if there is.
okay. Anything else?
Nope.
Yeah. Well, I'm
Okay.
glad we started this process now, not in November, because this was a hefty lift. So,
If I may, Member Dominguez, I just wanted to acknowledge and appreciate your willingness to want to provide more of this like community and like I want to say community organizing type of lens into the governance manual, right? Because I feel like it's you can be seen as very corporate, but we want to make sure that it's something that's understandable to the public, right? Because we are in the public eye. So I really appreciate you wanting to share leadership and make sure that those things are put into the governance manual. And I think it's important, for me at least, it helps me understand how things are moving forward. And then also member Jackson, again, I always tell you, you have a great expertise in language and these like contractual things. So I think that it was just a good conversation, and I look forward to having more policy committee meetings.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for enduring this much needed but long committee meeting. But I knew this was going to happen because there's lots of good conversation happening, I think. And so I'm going to move on to item 4, the chair report. The ad hoc committee assigned to complete the board's policy review will complete its work by October 1st. And I wrote here a reminder, please, as to who is on the ad hoc of the,
Policy diet?
yes,
That's myself and Heather.
okay. Heather and Courtney. During this review, the committee will review the board policies that were scored at 5 on a range of 1 to 10, I think it was, or 0 to 10. So these policies that the ad hoc committee is reviewing scored 5 or higher. They recommend that the board either keep these policies, archive them, or assign them to the administration, or modify them. The policies in need of modification will be revised to align them with the board's statutory obligations and student outcomes focused governance. At the November Policy Committee meeting, we will continue to review the governance manual and discuss the ad hoc's work. And let's see, with that, the next Policy Committee meeting will be November 4th at 5 p.m. virtually. Watch on the APS Board of Education YouTube channel. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you for your hard work.